Hello, John here. In today's episode, we're going to start a new series called The Business of Tech. My hope is to entertain viewers with interesting information on the business side for tech companies. It could be related to financial results, market share, or even new product releases. In this first video, I thought it would be cool to look at how some of the companies compare to each other that we're used to looking at. I think you'll find it interesting, so please stay tuned. Over time, I plan on providing information and updates on various companies that may or may not be directly related to new product releases. There are already a bunch of really good YouTube channels out there that cover product releases, product news, and product reviews. I want to try to do something a little bit different, and hopefully you'll like it. For this first episode, I thought it would be interesting to try to graphically compare a number of companies that we're kind of familiar with in the tech space. The companies I chose for this are AMD, Apple, ASUS, Corsair, Intel, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Sony, and TSMC. These are all companies that we are familiar with one way or another given our interest in this hobby. But how do they compare with each other? In order to do a comparison, I looked at 4 different metrics. First one was the number of employees each company has. This gives a general idea of how large each company is. Second, I looked at total revenue or sales. Third, I looked at net income. While total revenue gives an idea of the company's size, net income gives a better idea of how well each company is run. And then lastly, I looked at market capitalization for each firm. This is a representation of how much each company is worth. This worth is based on sales, profitability, also projected future sales and profitability, the types of markets that they operate in, the types of products they sell, and what the general market attitudes are towards these businesses. Since market capitalization represents kind of the general value of each of these companies, I thought it would be the most interesting to go from the smallest to the largest in terms of market capitalization. First up is Corsair. Known for their cases, keyboards, and mice, Corsair has been a very successful company. Until recently, I had never owned a Corsair product, but I've always thought of them positively. Their products generally receive good reviews, and I've never heard any major issues with their work. Due to their success, they have started acquiring other companies in the technology sector, such as Origin PC and Elgato. When I decided to start this channel, I purchased an Elgato capture device, and I've been very happy with it. As you can see on this chart, Corsair employs 2,400 people, did $1.7 billion in revenues, from which they made net income of $100 million in 2020. Not bad. This performance gives them a market capitalization of $3 billion. To represent these statistics, I have charted them in a radial graph and will overlay the other companies on top as we continue our discussion. By all accounts, this is a pretty large company, but in the tech world, as we will see, they are pretty small. Next up is Asus. My channel has been focused on Asus. I can never figure out which way to say this. My channel has been focused on Asus, as my 3 current systems all have Asus motherboards. In addition to motherboards, Asus makes GPUs, peripherals, and phones, and I have a number of these. In addition to my 3 motherboards, I have an Asus case, I have a power supply, and I have 2 GPUs. I've had good success with Asus products, and I can see why they are one of the larger, more popular companies in the personal computing arena. You can see that they are much larger than Corsair in every parameter. It is interesting to see how much larger their sales are versus Corsair, but their profits are incrementally higher. Asus, like other companies such as Gigabyte, need to make massive investments in equipment and tooling to make their products. While this gives them an advantage since it creates barriers to entry from other companies, it also creates a lot of overhead. This means that Asus's profit margins are not going to be as large as some of the other companies we will look at. Frankly, this is not unique to Asus. Many companies in this industry operate on very thin margins, and a small mistake can wipe out a significant portion of their profits. How about AMD? They have been on a roll since the introduction of their Ryzen chips. They are also responsible for the design of the PlayStation and Xbox chips. As you can see, they have a much larger market capitalization than Asus, even though their revenues are less. Why is that? Well, one of the keys is that despite the lower revenues, their net income is much greater at $2.4 billion versus $950 million. AMD does not have the same fixed asset structure that Asus has. Their chip designs, if successful, like Ryzen, can provide significant profits without having to invest in the chip-making equipment. In addition, the investing community and stock market believe that AMD will continue to grow and generate greater revenue and net income in the future. All of this ties into their market capitalization figure. As large as AMD looks, they are positively dwarfed by our next company, Sony. Sony, known for PlayStation, Walkman, Sony Music, and Sony Movies, is a true conglomerate. They are also a very large camera sensor manufacturer, and many of their sensors are used by the largest mobile phone companies like Apple, Google, and Samsung. However, despite the significantly greater number of employees, revenue, and net income, their market capitalization is only slightly greater than AMD's. This says a little bit about both companies. One, it shows what the market expects AMD to become in the coming years, but it also shows what the market thinks of Sony's corporate structure. With a massive amount of employees, many different businesses, some of which are barely profitable, the market does not think as optimistically about Sony's future prospects as it does about AMD's. However, as with everything else, time will tell. It's also interesting, as we'll get into in a couple of minutes, to see how some of these companies cross each other's paths. Next up is AMD's biggest competitor, Intel. Intel is the gorilla of the semiconductor industry. Even though we have seen AMD's Ryzen chips take Intel's chips out to the woodshed lately, Intel is still making massive amounts of money. $20.9 billion in net income for the past year. That is more than double AMD's gross revenues. More than double. Given their size and their chip-making capacity, don't count Intel out. I believe they will eventually get their act together in the PC space and we'll see much more competitive products from them. Next up is NVIDIA. Designers of GeForce GPUs as well as other types of semiconductors, NVIDIA has been on a financial roll over the past several years. Compared to Sony and Intel, NVIDIA is positively tiny. Why is their market capitalization so much larger than both Sony and Intel? Again, it's the profitability from their level of sales. Their margins are incredibly high, and the market expects the company's sales to continue to grow. Another thing to recognize is that Intel owns its own fabricating plants. These facilities are incredibly expensive to build and require many, many employees to operate. NVIDIA and AMD subcontract out their chip-making designs to third-party fabricators. This allows both companies to have less employees, yet generate significant profits. The challenge is that both companies have to scratch and claw to make sure that they are allocated fabrication. This creates a risk that Intel does not have. So who does make chips for AMD and NVIDIA? Well, there are a number of companies including Samsung and GlobalFoundries. However, the biggest one is TSMC. TSMC fabricates chips not only for AMD and NVIDIA, but also for Apple and Qualcomm. This has propelled TSMC to become the most valuable chip fabricator in the world. While their revenues are not as great as Intel's, the company is extremely profitable and has a market capitalization that is much larger than Intel's. Our last two companies are the Bigfoots of the industry. Bigfoots? Big feet? Anyway, first we have Microsoft approaching $150 billion a year in sales with a market capitalization of almost $2 trillion. They have come a long way from the early days of MS-DOS, where their mantra was, DOS isn't done until 123 won't run. Let me know in the comments if you understand that reference. And last but far from least is Apple. A market capitalization of over $2.3 trillion, Apple has started to move away from Intel for its PC chips and has started to design their own chips with TSMC manufacturing them. In this last chart, we can see how the sizes of Microsoft and Apple just dwarf the other companies, going all the way down to Corsair, which is basically just a point on the graph, and Asus and AMD are barely visible. It's interesting that all of these companies kind of interrelate. As I mentioned, Sony makes camera sensors for Apple products. AMD designs the chips that get put into PlayStations and Xboxes. TSMC may be the one that are manufacturing those chips that are designed by AMD. Asus and Corsair provide products that are used with Intel and NVIDIA processors. They're all kind of interrelated, yet they're all competing with each other. So I just thought, again, it was fascinating to take a look at all of these different companies from a graphical perspective to see how they compared with each other. So that's it for this one. Stay tuned for more tech-oriented news and information in future videos. Well, I hope you found this information as interesting as I found it. We as consumers tend to lump all of these companies together, and it's important to realize that we shouldn't have the same expectations for companies like Corsair and ASUS that we have with Microsoft and Apple. They simply don't have the same resources available to them. On the other hand, when we look at Microsoft and Apple, given their resources, they should be held to a higher standard. Thanks for watching. If you find these videos useful, please consider liking and subscribing, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.